Hi Dekai, hi everyone. So we're connecting with Professor Dekai, who's based in Hong Kong in the name of the Bosphorus Summit. So the Bosphorus Summit started these series of live conversations on what we're going through during the COVID-19 and what we expect to see after hopefully this COVID-19 phase is over. So Dekai, welcome online with us. This is so exciting to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, I'll give a bit of an introduction about who you are because you're an amazing person, apart from being a dear friend. So Dekai is a professor of computer science and engineering from the University of Science and Technology of Hong Kong. And he's also a distinguished research scholar of International Computer Science Institute, Berkeley. He's an artificial intelligence professor. He's a machine translation pioneer. He's the founding fellow of the Association of Computer Linguistics, and he's the inaugural member of Google AI Ethics Council. So basically, you are teaching machines how to speak and how to behave. Can we say that?
Well, yeah. Well, we're trying. Long way to go.
Yeah. How is it going so far? First of all, how's the COVID going? How's the Corona days going there in Hong Kong?
Hong Kong has actually handled it very well. So during these last 4.5 months, I've not been able to return to my Berkeley base, sadly. But normally, because I see both sides of the Pacific very regularly, it was really striking to see the difference in the approaches between Hong Kong and the US in handling COVID. It was, on the one hand, taken extremely seriously in Hong Kong, which has handled it very well. In January already, in late December already, we were talking about it and planning measures. So, for example, the University of Science and Technology here in Hong Kong was supposed to have started classes on February 1st, but throughout January, we were already planning, and we never actually opened the campus physically. We were already set to do the entire semester of teaching online. And everybody was not only already doing social distancing, and the government had set up for testing and for contact tracing, but everybody voluntarily already put on masks starting in January. And that means like 99% of the population, this was measured. And so, on the other hand, in the US, I had a chance to see other parts of the US in January, in mid-January, and it was being completely disregarded. People were talking about the coronavirus, and then in February, people were beginning to look at data of what countries were doing about it. And to my alarm and my increasing alarm, nobody in the West or outside of East Asia was talking about this universal wearing of face masks, which was such an important part of the success in all of the East Asian countries that managed to suppress the exponential spread of the virus. And that's not only Hong Kong, it's also South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, and Singapore, later followed by the Czech Republic and Slovenia and Slovakia.
Yeah.
It's like 100% correlation between the countries that successfully fought down the exponential spread of the virus and universal masking. But what I was seeing in the US and large parts of Europe and much of the developing world today is still not understanding how important it is for almost all of the population, 80 to 90% of the population, to be wearing masks in order to be able to stop the exponential spread. And so that really worried me. Like half the population wearing masks is just not good enough. And we are still seeing that in many countries in the West and around the world. That half the population wearing masks, according to our studies that we've been working on that are very much in the international news these days, it has almost no impact on slowing the virus because of the exponential behavior. And so we started to look at different countries in Europe, other 4 collaborators all over Europe.
We lost you a little bit as you were speaking, Dekai. Could you repeat your last sentence?
Yes. So five of us, four collaborators in Europe, uh, who include Vishal Nangalia in Royal Free Hospital in London, Alexei Morgunov, who is out of Cambridge but is bunkering down in Estonia during the virus, Anna Rotkirch in Finland, and Guy-Philippe Goldstein in Paris. We banded together to try to do something about this. We did a lot of new empirical validation of the hypotheses. We built two new theoretical models, and they really have taken off in terms of the viewing. The empirical models look like what you're seeing behind me here. I'll just move aside.
We lost you again.
Slow the spread, but if only half the population is wearing masks by day 50, it doesn't slow it down enough. If you wait until day 75 after the outbreak, it's just not enough. And so there's a 4-minute video that we can send people to look at.
I think we will share that link with our audience following this interview, so they can go and check out the video. Because it's very enlightening, actually. So you're right. I mean, you're saying basically as a message to everyone listening to us and to all governments, basically, is that the use of the mask really is an important factor to diminish the spread of this disease. And this will make it easier to normalize the whole situation. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And well, tell me then, like, so this has been a very interesting experience for every single human on this planet, right? Because we all of a sudden had to stop our day-to-day lives and be confined into one space, not travel, not move, not leave our houses. And we had to be more creative in terms of the way we work, the way we interact with our friends, with our family, or the way we handle ourselves. So, like, what do you think this corona has taught us from the technological point of view? What do you think it has been changing in the way humanity has been interacting or behaving?
Well, a couple of thoughts on that, obviously. One of the interesting things to me is that these coronavirus times have simultaneously, and it's a little bit of a contradiction, which makes it interesting, they've simultaneously brought us back to our physical humanity. Just because we've been locked down, we can't travel, we're around those people in our immediate neighborhood, and in many ways reconnecting with that, which I think has been healthy for a lot of us. And at the same time, ironically, it's driven us further very quickly into the virtual world. Mm-hmm. We are spending time now together in the virtual world as our.
You're in Hong Kong, I'm in Turkey.
And I think many of us have been doing a lot of these, all the way from serious conversations to all the dance parties online that people are doing. So it's a very interesting way that it's driven us to these two extremes of remembering our physical humanity and our physical environment and what we can do to improve that, but also pushing us to explore. I would guess that 80% of the population at least is using tons of tools, beginning with Zoom and all of these others, that they had resisted learning for years, and now out of necessity have realized, oh, this is actually kind of nice. I am actually seeing colleagues that I normally don't get to see very often, friends that are around the world, and I'm actually spending more time with them than I used to when I had to physically fly to go see them or something. So this is something that's really nice that I think the tech has brought us and may stick with us past the virus. I think the other thing technologically, I teach an AI ethics course at the university, and we focus on many issues, but very strongly on the problem of information disorder, on misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. And we see over and over the striking effects on society of that. It's an unintended consequence of the technology that has brought us the internet, wireless, AI-powered social media, as well as AI-powered search engines. And those AIs today are already de facto deciding what you don't see, because they can only show you the top 10, top 20 posts. You don't have time to read more or search hits. And so they're deciding, oh, well, here's the billion posts in the last day that I'm not going to let you see.
Wow.
That
so
creates
AI is picking it for us, so to speak. So AI is doing the picking for us based on all our behavior online.
Exactly. It's you know, it's de facto. It's algorithmic censorship.
Yes.
You know, I think we delude ourselves. Oh, it's not censorship because the material is out there. Nobody prevented you from posting it. But if there's no way for people to find it, 99.999% of the people can never find that material, then de facto this is algorithmic censorship, and there's no way around it. We just don't have enough time to see all the posts. Some algorithm has to decide for us. And so this is a foundational problem in AI ethics that I've been focusing on. And we decided to study the disinformation problem in the COVID domain for obvious reasons. It's an excellent case study because we saw right from the start a huge amount of misinformation and disinformation and malinformation even being propagated to this day. And it was really instructive. We started mapping out the kinds of memes that were being created and the motivations behind them and the consequences, whether intended or unintended. But the most interesting thing about this whole thing is that we really find that what is happening is that the AIs that power social media and search engines are in search of profit. So they're in search of maximizing the number of clicks that their users make and the amount of eyeball time that they get, people reading what they're showing them, because that's where all the advertising revenue is. And so what happens is that the AIs learn very, very quickly the way to maximize profit is by appealing to our very natural, evolutionarily hardwired, unconscious cognitive biases.
Oh my God.
And we have hundreds of those unconscious biases. We have overconfidence effects, pseudo-certainty effects, Dunning-Kruger effects, ambiguity effects, bias, blind spots. And so AIs have learned to prey upon our unconscious biases in order to maximize profit. And this is insidious. This is very dangerous. It undermines the foundation.
We're not free, even in a free atmosphere that we think, the internet is, in a way. So we're kind of like self-limiting because at the same time, our previous choices define what we receive online, right? Could we say
exactly?
That? Yeah.
Very much. And we're unaware of it because these are
unconsciously. Yeah.
If we sit and ask, what are your unconscious cognitive biases? Like
I wouldn't be able to answer. Yeah.
I don't know because they're unconscious. And great psychologists and cognitive scientists have studied these. People like Tversky and Kahneman, Danny Kahneman, who wrote the bestseller Thinking Fast and Slow, talks about a bunch of this. And so, we started asking, well, how is this affecting how we are failing in our response to the coronavirus? And so this, there are very broad effects. So for example, the AI-powered social media amplified very much our unconscious representativeness heuristic. Yes. And that means that we make wrong predictions based on our experience of similar events in our experience. And so for most people outside of East Asia, or even in East Asia, it was SARS and MERS and Ebola and things like that. And so in the West, it was heavily, unconsciously thinking, oh, it's going to be another one of those. It strikes funny-looking people on the other side of the world, and we don't really have to worry about it.
Well, in Spain, I was in Madrid when the whole corona happened, and they took it lightly. They thought, no, it's just another type of flu, and look at where they got. So you're right. Many people took it very lightly. and it did
Yeah, exactly.
else. Yeah.
And so, and that ended up, heavily causing much of the West to throw away the 2 months of extra warning that the West had before the virus really struck there, which was terrible, right? That's a huge lesson that we need to learn. Social media powered by AIs, we're also busy feeding our present bias. The present bias is an unconscious cognitive bias that focuses us on immediate payoffs, instant gratification and future trade-offs. And so everybody was like, well, if we do anything, this is going to kill our economy. And not bothering to think through that, oh, gee, the economic damage is going to be exponentially larger because we didn't do anything about it today. But if you looked at the social media in the West in January, February, it was all full of that. It was amplifying those kinds of messages. Everything's okay. It's just like a bad flu, and so forth. And there was a lot of other sort of general things. So AIs were driving polarization and hatred with memes like Chinese eat bats that causes COVID. And Chinese don't eat bats. The scientists overwhelmingly think that this was natural, animal to animal and then to human, like many viruses evolve. And wild game is actually eaten in most of the world, not only in China. But because you make more profit, AI learns to appeal to our confirmation bias, because that's what we're going to read. It triggers fear, it triggers outrage.
A story received becomes the more real story, so to speak, even though it's not.
Lots of money. It triggers our empathy gap, which is another bias that, like we don't say that H1N1 swine flu is the American virus, even though the American CDC says that is where it started. And it kicks in our defensive attribution bias, which is an unconscious bias to blame someone else more and more as the consequences become more and more severe.
And that plays on directly with economy as well, because of those biases. There's like these economic wars. There are preferences in terms of where you do trade with, which country you work with. So it actually has a monetary effect as well on a larger scale.
It absolutely does. There's a lot of framing bias going on around this that causes, the choice of how you metaphorically describe these situations drives people to make a decision or take an action that has major impact economically and in terms of trade. And, it really also leans in on the reiteration effect, which makes us believe things because of repeated exposure, as opposed to rationality. So familiarity with an idea overpowers rational thinking.
Yes.
So I think that with things like masking and testing and so forth, it was really crippling in our Western response, and we don't recognize enough that the causes for our slow, fatal reaction speed comes from our blind acceptance of the illusion that somehow having all this information somewhere on the internet is good enough, and that we don't really have to think about what that information disorder is doing to our mindsets, to the mindsets of our policymakers, and to picking the right choices. There was so much that was discussing in the media, the social media, about things like, is this an escaped bioweapon? It's a Chinese bioweapon. Oh no, it's an escaped American bioweapon. All this kind of, like, so much oxygen has been taken by that, despite the fact that overwhelmingly scientists, specialists in the field say it's
as well. Those stories are entertaining. So I think that's that. You're right. But I want to also talk about the effects of this post-COVID era. I sometimes feel like maybe this was a way for humanity to kind of pass on to this the digital era that we're slowly moving into, and this has kind of made it a little bit more easy for humans to get used to that, to get used to this kind of technological interaction, to get used to not moving but getting things done or delivered, etc., or doing business without having to physically be in places. So is this a way for us to be more easily getting used to the new normal, which is the digital age?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, the wonderful thing about this, and again, they're both sides of the coin. So like the really nice part about this that I think we should hang on to is, for example, that carbon emissions have dropped by 17% already, right? I mean, think about all the trouble we have been having worldwide in trying to get nations to commit to much less in terms of the targets in reduction on carbon emissions, right? We've struggled for decades, from Kyoto onward. We have countries pulling out of the Paris Accord, who I don't have to name. And the thing is, we have a once in a lifetime chance here, because this has forced nations to take the economic hit short term, show that yes, we can actually reduce the carbon emissions. Yes, there is an impact on our economy, and we have to rethink from the ground up how we handle these crises economically. But because we have no choice, we are actually doing it.
Yes.
And it would be a real shame if, let's say, we get past the COVID crisis, if we just let go of that. That is something that we need to hang on to. We need to say, okay, we've begun to develop these infrastructures where we can really make a serious difference on climate change and sustainability. And let's see how we can make use of the right kinds of technology to continue doing that. So that's, I think, really very much on the positive side. And obviously what we're doing right now virtually is a great part of that. And then on the flip side, I think one of the things that we need to watch out for is that as we increasingly move everything online, all of these things are now, because they're online, now they become the beans that AIs are deciding whether to spread or to hide. And so suddenly now we've handed the AIs even more power to exponentially take this and whether unintentionally or not, to drive divisive, polarized conversations in where a conversation like this that we're having now maybe only gets shown to people who already agree with the various things we're saying, and never gets shown to people who actually might benefit from the alternate perspective, and vice versa. And so I think because we haven't tackled that problem, because the conversation on that is still, I have to say, largely in denial. There are so many voices that are just saying, well, fundamentally, we have this principle that we're going to allow the freedom of expression to put any sort of misinformation out there, and we're going to allow for-profit AIs to decide how to maximize their revenue by showing whatever misinformation or disinformation or malinformation maximizes their revenue. That is another exponential problem. That is just like masking, a problem where if you only have protection against 50% of that, it will make no difference on the infodemic.
And the interesting thing is,
just like biological viruses, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, those are information viruses. They're viral memes, and they have exactly the same exponential behavior as the biological viruses that we're tackling, which means that you need the overwhelming majority, 80, 90% of people being somehow protected against that in order to actually tackle that. And information accuracy is the lifeblood of successful democratic governance. So we have to face that problem up front and ask, what hard choices are we going to make about what kinds of antibodies we need, mental antibodies we need, and AI-powered antibodies we need in order to keep our information relatively virus-free so that we can have successful democracies going forward that don't suffer from the kinds of damage that we saw with the coronavirus, where
That is
so many people have needlessly lost their lives. And that's just the first of the pandemics like this. There could be much worse pandemics coming down the road where that kind of misinformation-driven poor planning could be an extinction event for humanity.
wow. So this is actually something which you say is very enlightening, because nobody's actually aware of what's going on with all of these preparations in the AI world. We are not even aware who is actually designing this world, who is actually working on the ethics of the AI, who is tackling these issues of misinformation, or how AI is driving itself, because it's kind of like it's kind of like a living organism right now. It's kind of like growing on its own, growing up on its own like a kid, right? So who is actually behind this? Who is there trying to make sure it doesn't get out of hand? Or is there a body like that? Is there like an international association? Are governments involved? Are these professors? So can you like enlighten us in that respect a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a growing community worldwide in the field of AI ethics and society. Just in the last couple of years, it's very young at this point. There are think tanks. For example, the Future Society is one that I serve on the board of. But then there are others that are in governments. There are bodies that are national, and those tend to reflect specific cultural approaches to that region. And then there are places that are trying to bridge that and bring together a more holistic worldwide view, because just like with biological pandemics, it's very hard to control this type of phenomena within the borders of a single country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But then do you think with AI we're going to be more free with information, or how we're influenced by information that we receive, because we're constantly connected online, or are we going to be more homogenous as humanity on this planet?
I think that we need to be both. So this is a little bit like the contradiction we talked about with the coronavirus, making us both more aware of our physical humanity and our environment, and also going much more extreme in the virtual world. We're going to have to do that. But that actually makes sense, because what we need is, one way or another, whether it's in our own human training of our human minds, or whether it's the AIs that are the infrastructure that circulates information these days. In both cases, the antidote, the antibodies to information disorder come from a few things: critical thinking, having an open mind, looking at a diversity of hypotheses, a focus on empirical validation, and on statistical validity and logical consistency, right? So these are critical thinking skills that are the only way to tackle this.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way to make the correct choices democratically if we don't tackle that. And when we look at the big picture, what did humanity do that was successful to increase that kind of critical thinking? Well, since the Enlightenment, it was the scientific method. What is the scientific method? It is, number one, observation of the data. Look at a lot of data, look at it hard, and observe what's happening without your a priori biases. Right? So scientific method is all about trying to compensate for those million years of unconscious cognitive bias that evolution hardwired into us. Right? And then the next step is having actually observed the data to look at hypotheses that are possibly opposing each other. So you don't just follow the first idea that you have. This avoids confirmation bias.
Right.
And so instead, we honestly lay out multiple conflicting hypotheses. We flesh them out. We give them all, like a fair chance. we do screen them according to whether they match the empirical data or not. Once we've narrowed down a range of reasonable hypotheses, then we go and we look for the empirical validation. So we either set up experiments or we count what's happening in the real world. Super important not to avoid counting that up and making sure that there's logical consistency with what we're hypothesizing.
Mhm.
And when we finish that, we do hard error analysis. We look at where did our hypothesis go wrong? What are we missing? Most importantly, what are the contexts that we miss, right? A lot of the information disorder is not about just simply fake news or fake facts. A lot of times it's actually the things that are reported are not untrue. They're actually true. The problem is they've been reported in a way that completely misses the context, right? So the information disorder is omitted context. So for example, if you were reporting, say, that, I don't know, the police were beating a protester or something like that, and the report only said that,
Yeah.
and showed video, something like that, everybody is like, oh my gosh, police brutality and so forth. But if you also show the omitted context that 5 seconds before that, let's say the protesters were beating the police and setting them on fire or something, then that would change the picture, right? And so the thing is, you always want to have the entire picture before you leap to a conclusion. And that works both ways, right? So I just picked a random example. I could reverse the roles and this would still be accurate. This is the sort of thing that we as humans are very ill prepared to deal with. It's unconscious. The framing bias naturally causes us to go according to our preconceptions, our confirmation bias. And what's really insidious, what's really dangerous is other unconscious biases. The continued influence effect causes us to continue to believe things that we've already been shown counter evidence to. So even if consciously we say, oh, yeah, okay, so maybe I wasn't 100% correct there, unconsciously, we still go on making inferences based on those prior incorrect beliefs.
It's way too complicated. I mean, you have a lot of work to do as AI expert, and your area is going to shape the future of our societies. But I want you to and we have just a few minutes left. I want you to just let us know what kind of a future is expected. What is going to change in the new future with the advent of technology? What differences are we going to actually experience in our day-to-day lives?
We're going to see a lot more use of these online tools. I think people have discovered that there are some really great advantages to these tools. Yes, it's not the same as all being in the same room together.
Yeah.
We're a long way from being able to substitute for that. But I think people have also discovered that a lot of conversations are possible without doing that. I think people have discovered that a lot of this new tech is actually maturing at a rapid speed. I was yesterday given a tour of a world in virtual reality. We actually had our conference, if you like, our video conference, not via Zoom or Google Meet or whatever. We were literally in virtual reality.
Oh my God.
Sitting out in the middle of a beautiful festival land. Everybody had their own avatars, and we were speaking to each other, turning around, walking around, touring the place while we were having.
You actually had an avatar in this virtual world.
Yeah, and you could customize it and look like you, and yes, and that sort of thing will make it even more natural without the carbon emissions of flying physically, for people to have a more human experience. And I think those kinds of things they're being propelled this year. The amount of progress in that is going to be huge.
Wow.
The fact that Zoom's market evaluation now is more than seven times that of the top 7 airlines, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. But all of that is driving the development of these kinds of technologies much faster. And because people are forced to use them, adoption is also going much faster. And these are the kinds of things that we can use to cut down. The fact that people are not driving around doing their individual shopping as much and consolidating delivery. Yes, there are a lot of economic effects. There are a lot of damages to traditional shops and so forth. We're going to have very hard conversations about that. But reducing our carbon emissions on fossil fuel-based economies, especially, but just energy in general, that's going to be, I think, a huge benefit, silver lining of this tragedy that we're going through with the coronavirus.
This is very enlightening, Dekai. Really, this was amazing. But it also means that we're not going to only take care of our physical selves. Now we're going to have to take care of our virtual pseudo avatars as well. We're going to have more work to do, it seems, in the near future in a
Yeah,
virtual world. Yeah,
our
yeah,
brains are going to come together more and more with
yeah.
our AIs in cyberspace, virtual reality, and half my brain is already there. I'm pretty much helpless without my like AI
Without
advice.
oh my God, this is incredible.
So we better take care of our combined mental health as well.
That is so important. Yes, it's important to be centered. It's important to also do a lot of internal work because it's going to be very exponential, this whole change that is coming up. Yeah. But the good thing is we don't have to wear shoes while we're having meetings like these ones. That's an advantage, I guess.
Yes, and that's a great cultural bias that maybe
Yeah,
could transfer.
yeah, that's
East
true.
Asian countries will all remove their shoes anyway
Yes.
before going inside.
The West will turn into that as well. All right. Okay. Well, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for your time that you connected with us from all the way in Hong Kong. I hope soon things will, open up and you can go back to Berkeley. You've been away for a long time, and hope to see you here in Turkey soon in our summit. And we don't know when it will open up, but hopefully at the end of this year.
Looking forward to that.
Thank you, Dekai. Thank you.
Thank you, John.